Hi, I'm Penaz Eisner. I made the film Lairs, amongst other films, but that's the one we're going to be talking about today. And I am from San Francisco, California.
I'm Kira. I made the film Period, and I've made some other films, but we're going to talk about Period today. I currently live in Greenville, South Carolina, but also Asheville, North Carolina. So I guess the first question, what was the first project that made you fall in love with filmmaking?
I mean, for me, I've been making films since I was literally 5 years old. And so honestly, it was one of those things that immediately, once I started doing it, I realized it was my thing, my calling, you know? I'd had multiple other career potential options before that, including pilot, archaeologist, etc. But like I sat down with complete conviction at the dinner table when I was in kindergarten. I said, I'm going to be a film director and producer. And everybody believed me because I was just so set on it, and it didn't change since. So
yeah, I also started when I was a kid. When I was like 7 or 8, I was doing animations and also drawing and then singing and acting and like all the different filmmaking components. And so I guess by age 13, I knew by that point that I definitely was like, yes, filmmaking, that's what I want to pursue. But in terms of like a project where I felt like my soul was just 100% committed, when I was in high school, my senior year, I made a film called We're Okay. And with that film, it was like the first time where I had the experience of just being super personal and vulnerable with my work, and just that feeling of connecting to other people on a deep level through art and being able to start a dialogue. So when I had that experience, it kind of just solidified in my soul, like, wow, this is, like, on top of the fact that filmmaking is super cool and super exciting, it's like, this is a really just amazing tool that we have to talk about things. So, yeah.
that's kind of the way I feel about it too. I mean, I honestly think that it's one of those things that basically functions as like a primary form of communication, I guess, because it reaches out to so many people. And if you can make something that entertains people enough to draw them in, then you can then communicate basically a lot to them. And it's kind of a back and forth between, I feel like, the filmmaker and the audience all the time, which I think it's really cool. So
with your film, which was super awesome, by the way, and I totally dig. And before I even get to this question, I was wondering, so one of my favorite filmmakers is Jan Svankmajer. Do you know
one
about
of my favorite filmmakers is Jan Svankmajer.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so when I was watching your film, when I first saw the hands, I was like, ooh, I got a little bit of a Svankmajer vibe. And then with the clay head, I was like, yes. I was just curious if you...
That was a complete homage to him. And honestly, okay, my family is Czech. My mom's side of the family is Czech, and they defected from the Czech Republic when my mom was a kid, her parents and her. And so all are basically big Svankmajer fans because he was so anti-communist, you know? Yeah. So they all thought that was really cool, basically. So it was something that I was introduced to from a really, early point in my childhood. Mm-hmm. And so I watched a lot of his films, and it's basically because of him that I sort of always integrated animation and live action in my work in that sort of way that he does, because I think that that's really just a really interesting way to make a film, you know?
Yeah, I really resonate with that. So when I was a kid, I had like my big clunker PC, and I remember somehow I was on YouTube and somehow I saw Svankmajer's food series, like the food films, and I remember feeling so strange watching it. Like it was such a different vibe than anything else. It still is, and it left such an impact on me. And I'm pretty sure that Svankmajer is the reason why I also love to mix animation and live action. So I feel you.
Yeah, I feel like the only other good example of that is honestly like Mary Poppins, and that's a total, other end of the spectrum of filmmaking.
Yeah, different vibe.
Yeah, completely different vibe.
What was a resource that you used when creating this film?
A resource that I used when creating this film, to be honest, was my mom, because she's a really talented poet. She's a published poet. And the poem in the film is her poem. I had a lot of communication with her around her poem and the intended meaning of her poem, basically. And I felt like that really bolstered, I guess, the quality of my film in terms of the message and in terms of the sort of accuracy to her original intentions in her poem, you know, because I think that otherwise that wouldn't have really happened, because I would have not had that direct communication with the poet, because I was trying to do this thing where I basically made an adaptation. So it wasn't just a film for a poem or a poem itself, but instead this third independent thing that kind of couldn't exist without the two like coalescing elements.
I was curious to hear, I guess, your interpretation of your mom's poem.
I think it's about basically a couple falling out of love, basically slowly and in a horrible way. And I know it's based on some people who she witnessed have this happen growing up, basically. I kind of thought it was an interesting comment on a more universal level about the sort of like masculine and feminine roles that people take in romantic relationships, heterosexual romantic relationships, and you know, how those elements work together and then ultimately could also fall apart in a sort of almost Jungian manner, where, you know, they hold this sort of psychoanalytical function as the anima and animus and stuff. And I think it's just really interesting to kind of universalize something that's kind of a personal experience. Yeah. And I think that kind of exists within the poem, but it's more borne out in the film.
With this particular film, I mean, maybe this is a boring answer, I don't know. I bought a plugin for After Effects. It's the Red Giant Universe plugin. And I think this is my first time where I've actually purchased a plugin. So that was cool. But this particular plugin, you can play around with different like effects and glitchy things and distortions. And so I had a lot of fun just experimenting with ways to show the degradation of reality and to transition between realities. So the Red Giant plugin was a resource that I used.
Something that I thought was really interesting about your film was the way that you, a play on words. I mean, the period thing, as in, you know, the menstrual cycle, but also the period thing as in a period piece, you know, or the red period, etc. The idea of that, like Picasso's blue period and that kind of thing. And I sort of was wondering how you came up with that idea to interwork those various sort of meanings into it.
A lot of the inspiration of the film actually comes from this period of time in my life where I was completely obsessed with the idea of having an out-of-body experience. That element of losing your sense of time also like plays into the film a bit when she's like time traveling in kind of like the astral realm through her memories, but they're distorted. And so I guess from that place of inspiration, everything already started to just become so layered. So as I was brainstorming scenes and just possibilities for the film, it all was so abstract. So like the layers it's hard to even put into words whenever I try to, it's just like a tree where it's just like, whoo, this layers coming out and this narrative, and I don't really know how to explain it all, but it just all started to pile together naturally.
I just think all of those sort of cross connections just work really well to bring it together as a piece that sort of refers to more than one thing simultaneously. And I think that's really cool.
I loved your stop motion camera moves where the camera was like coming in. That was super cool. I thought that like had a really nice feeling and was super clever and looked really good. So
thank you so much.
How did you do that?
Yeah, okay, basically what I did is I have this thing called a doozy that's supposed to be for, you see it a lot actually in advertisements, but people do it with video cameras, and they basically like slide it slowly down this doozy thing and it gets like this slight zoom, but it's not really, you know, a lens zoom. It's kind of nice, but I basically what I was doing is I was just putting my photography camera on top of it and taking pictures as I went. I always find it to be slightly uncanny because it just feels simultaneously quite smooth because it's not bouncing up and down or anything, and yet choppy. And I kind of wanted to create this sense of uncanniness and discomfort throughout the whole film. Yeah. And so I sort of felt like that aided to it.
I felt that. I'm
glad.
Yeah.
I love when my films make people feel uncomfortable and nervous.
Hey, yeah, I get that. Well, I guess random question. So you had a clay head. Did you sculpt the head?
I did sculpt the head. I actually don't do that much sculpture, but I figured I would be able to sculpt the clay head as long as I had one of those sort of foam hat holder head things that you can get at Blick, that's sort of vaguely face shaped, you know. So
that's smart.
I got that and I just built it on top of it, basically. So I did all the features and stuff, but I had a basic guide because otherwise I just thought it was going to collapse.
Nice.
And when you were making your film, sort of what your color scheme is really tight and sort of internally consistent, which is something that I feel like I strive for a lot in my films too. So I noticed it because I thought it was really awesome, basically. But I was sort of wondering, what kind of technique do you use to derive your color scheme? Because I always use like basically painterly techniques, where you make the grid and you do the 4 colors along the top and you mix them into all of their different possible, variations.
Ooh.
And then I just stick within that. Do you do something like that? Because you mentioned that you do other visual art, or is it just more intuitive?
With my films, generally when I'm writing, I have a color scheme that at some point early on I intuitively feel, and then that just becomes an integral part of the screenplay. And that's happened with a lot of my films where it's just from the beginning, it's like I feel it out as I'm imagining. So like in this film, there's like the 3 main rooms. We have the blue room, the red room, and the white room that turns to red. So anyways, with those 3, just early on, it was just like, yes, these are the colors. I really love bold color schemes. Just something I've always been really into, and it makes me really happy to see bold colors. So I like to figure out the color scheme and then stick to it and think about how the sets and the costumes and the props and all that can just like enhance that. So you've been making films since you were 5, you said. So how have you noticed yourself growing or changing as an artist?
I mean, to be fully honest, I didn't really start showing my films in film festivals till I was around 10 or 11, I think. And from that point forward, I can see that my trajectory has basically been such that every time I make a new film, I find something that I don't know how to do that I want to learn how to do, basically. And I find a way of using whatever resources I have to learn how to do that thing for that film. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like I make like technical steps every time up higher and higher. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense?
Yeah.
Because I want to have more control over the kinds of images I'm capable of creating. And that can only really be achieved through having a greater technical understanding of how to create those images.
I guess another aspect of my growth has been my comfortability with taking on film projects, because after a while, now that I've done enough films and music videos, I work with video clients, and it's gotten to a point where certain kinds of projects I feel a lot more at ease, whereas maybe a few years ago, sometimes these projects could evoke a lot of anxiety in me. And I'm not saying that it's gone away completely, but over time, I've gotten into just more a feeling of ease. So I'm still pushing myself to try new things, but I feel more comfortable with pushing myself and trying new things, and just realizing that a lot of the time, the magic happens when you try something new and it's unexpected, the results. So even if it's not what you were planning or what you intended, you sometimes discover something way cooler, and you discover a new part of your own just self-expression, I guess.
Is there anything you're working on right now, film-wise, school-wise, et cetera, et cetera?
I have a production company, so that's what I do full-time, and I have some clients. But actually, the past couple of months, I've become completely obsessed with the crypto art world. And so I've actually been putting a lot of my time and energy into my visual art, which is extremely unexpected, because one thing I've been reflecting on for the past few months is just how I never even really, my whole life I've been drawing and doing things, but I've never really identified as a visual artist. But now I'm starting to sell my visual art, and it's becoming like a viable big source of income for me, which is so
Really?
cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so I've been selling my art as NFTs. It's been crazy and super exciting.
That's really exciting. That's really like cool. I also feel like I've just been drawing and painting and doing photography and stuff my whole life too, because it just seems like something that kind of goes into making my films, at least to be able to have those skills, you know.
Yeah,
but sort of separately, when I step back and look at my work of that kind, it's actually genuinely good, you know, and it's sort of funny. I guess technically filmmaking is a visual art, so I have considered myself a visual artist in that sense, you know.
Yeah.
But I've never really thought of myself as having been a visual artist in those other ways, despite the fact that I create, you know, stuff like that all the time and stick it in my films, basically. Yeah. And it's, you know, objectively really good art. I don't know, that's just really interesting to think about.
You are a visual artist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm a visual artist.
Whoa! Breakthrough during the interview. Whoa! That's awesome.
Film can be artistically viable and also entertaining. And I think that you understand this like more than anyone, since your films are literally artistically viable and also entertaining.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
You know, I just think that that's something that's really important to me, because ultimately I want to basically produce and direct films and run my own production company and basically be in an executive position where I basically support directors who make films that are just, you know, not Marvel films, basically films that are new films that are interesting and films that are entertaining and don't assume like stupidity amongst lay people, you know. And so I'm sort of just trying to prove my chops in that area, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What is the best piece of advice you've received related to filmmaking?
The best advice for filmmaking, I'm going to paraphrase it and probably screw it up horribly, but it is actually what Jerry Lewis said in his book, The Total Filmmaker, when he says basically, if you want to make a film, just do it. It doesn't have to be light. It doesn't have to be color. It doesn't have to be sound. It doesn't have to be like anything else. It doesn't matter. Just do it. Get out there, take a camera, film something, make something, do it. And that's like the only way you're going to learn how to do it. So, I mean, that actually is probably the best advice.
I was literally thinking, just go for it as the best advice. Just exactly what you said.
Basically.
I mean, I've actually done the 48-hour film project a ton of times. Have you done the 48-hour film project
I've
before?
Never done that, because I feel like it would make me have a mental breakdown.
Yes. Well, the thing about the 48-hour film, it causes everybody to go crazy. It's inevitable, but you have 48 hours to make a film, and I've done it like 15 times at this point. And the reason why I've done it so many times is because it forces you to just do it, just go for it, where you know, like, I'm committing myself to just making something, and I'm not going to overthink it. I'm not going to second guess myself. I'm just going to go for it and put all my energy and passion into it. And I mean, regardless of the 48-hour film project or not, I think that same kind of energy of just like allowing yourself to be passionate and to just not worry so much that you stop yourself, just go for it and release the feelings, release your subconscious, and put it out into the world.
And I think that also the other thing that I've realized over time, and this is probably advice I'd give to other people, is that film is totally about communication with other human beings. It's because I just think it's sort of important to understand that the audience is just as important as the filmmaker. Like, the filmmaker and the audience are constantly communicating with one another. That's literally the point of the medium. And
I would add on to that, though, that sometimes you haven't found the right audience yet. Because sometimes you might play your super weird film in front of a group of people who are not used to super weird films, and they're like, don't know what to say. And even in that case,
even if they don't know what to say, that doesn't mean they aren't going to think about it tomorrow at 2 a.m, because it impacted them enough, and that's a success.